Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. All right, everyone, welcome back to our final part of our ADHD series. And today we are going to talk about impulsivity. Wait, impulsivity? Is that what you just said? Yep. Impulsivity. And we're going to go over those really quickly because we want to get this series wrapped up. We hope it was helpful for everyone listening. We have so many ideas coming out of these episodes, which probably makes sense for the ADHD series to create a lot of creative ideas for us. And we're really looking forward to having a guest on next week as well, who's going to be talking about ADHD and their experiences as well. So, Megan, do you want to do the clinical side of this?
Yeah. So we've been walking through the DSM criteria and we just walked through hyperactivity last time. And as a refresher, hyperactivity and impulsivity are actually like clumped together, but also have distinct traits. So with impulsivity, and again, similar to the hyperactive, these are written with children in mind. So we have to kind of recontextualize them when thinking about adult ADHD. So the first one is often blurts out answers before a question has been completed, completes people's sentences, cannot wait, turn for conversation. I'm already smiling because I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I did so much of this. And then I'd always feel so much shame about it. But when you feel like you know where a sentence is going, the urge to like finish that sentence, um, it's something, we talked about the self-monitor last time. Like it's something my self-monitor has gotten better at, but it takes a lot of effort for me to not complete people's sentences.
Yeah. And agreed. Same here. And I mean, it was a lot harder for me in school to not blurt things out, to not finish sentences. I think socially now it's become less challenging for me to not finish sentences. But I do agree, especially if you feel like I know where the sentence is going. I don't want to forget what I'm about to say. That's a big piece too, because you're like, I've been waiting to interject for what feels like an eternity, and I have this great idea, and I'm like holding my breath or like clenching my fist or doing whatever I need to do to not blurt the answer out or my response out. So absolutely can relate for sure.
The other time I'll do is like if I'm really engaged in a conversation, then I will also do it. And it's a way of like showing my engagement. I actually didn't realize this was rude for a while. Um, because it was something that I was like, when I'm really engaged, I do. And like I'd kind of be comfortable with people also hopping in and doing it with me.
Right.
Um, but I actually didn't realize this was rude for a long time, even into my adult years. I think I only realized how much I did this a couple years ago. One of the things, one of the reasons that helped train me to stop doing this is Zoom. Because when you finish someone's sentence in Zoom, there's that thing where like you can't hear both people. And so that's actually been what has taught me to stop finishing people's sentences.
Thanks, Zoom. Um, Going to our sponsor for Zoom for this podcast. No, yeah, I agree 100%. It's easier for me if we're in a virtual setting because a lot of people will speak and like put their thought out and then mute. So if they mute themselves, I'm like, okay, now it's my turn to talk. So it almost like retrains my brain on how that communication often goes. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
hmm Um, yes. Okay. And then the next one is often has trouble waiting their turn, like while waiting in line. Oh, I hate waiting in line. Unless I almost always like would come prepared. And I think it's probably different now that folks have iPhones with them all the time. But like before that in college, I'd always have a book with me. Like wherever I go somewhere, I pretty much always have a book with me because the experience of waiting and doing nothing feels so dreadful to me.
Yes. I think about being in line for anything right now, bank, grocery store, wherever, where it's either moving really slowly and I'm like, I can't understand why it's moving really slowly, or the person ahead of you orders 40 items or it's just like they're having their own conversation with the cashier. And I'm just like, okay, I'm about to put this stuff down and walk out of here and come back a different day. But yeah, it's very, very challenging for me as well.
I will pretty much always first of all, I don't go to the grocery store much, but if I do, I'll pretty much always do self-checkout, even if it's a ton of stuff and I know it will take longer. Because
Yeah.
there's something about even though it'll take longer, I'm doing something versus, like, waiting in a line doing nothing, that even if I know that would be shorter, like, that feels way more stressful to me than just doing self-checkout. Um, do you do the counting thing? Like counting, okay, there's 4 people ahead of me, and, like,
Oh,
I'm, like,
yeah.
kind of recounting.
Absolutely. And it also impacts my decisions. I'm like, okay, there's 5 people in that line. There's 3 over here. That person has more items though. Like that cashier looks like they're slower. Like there's a lot going on right there before I make that decision about which line to jump into.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, another way this shows up for me, I think I briefly mentioned last time was, like, I don't like, board games are hard for me. So, I I feel some embarrassment about this, but, like, as a parent, like, so sometimes we'll play board games, and again, this was pre-discovery of our whole family. You know, one of my kids might get distracted on their turn, and I'll, like, kind of poke them and be like, "It's your turn. It's your turn. Like, go." Like,
No,
I
I know.
can't,
I'm just
like
thinking about what I'm about to do. And you're like, no, it's like, let's hurry this up.
like and so this is again goes back to my spouse of, like, you just don't relax well, like, playing games with me, I don't think is necessarily, like, a relaxing experience because 'cause I'm like, "Okay, go, go, go."
It's funny. I can definitely relate to that too. And it's often like I think it gets labeled as like you're being really impatient. You're being like,
Mm.
you know, you're being kind of like borderline aggressive in this process. And I'm like, no, I can't wait for you to take 5 minutes to roll the dice. Like, can we
Mhm.
hurry this along?
The
Isn't this
thing so
fun?
my workaround for that is if I'm multitasking, then I feel okay with it, but then if I'm multitasking, like, the kids will be like, "But can you just play?" Instead of, like, multitasking, and it's like, Yeah, but then I'm gonna be impatient." So it's just this just gets back to what we talked about last time about, like, it's just so hard to be present because it's like
Yeah.
either I'm multitasking so that I'm not impatiently there,
Yep.
or I'm there, but I have this, like, "Let's keep it moving, people."
And that even goes back to like interrupting people, right? While they're speaking. I don't want to forget what I'm saying. I want to be a part of the conversation. But then it's like, well, I can't really be present with the conversation because I'm focused so much on interrupting because I need to get my point across or I don't want to forget what I'm about to say. So yeah, it's a interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah, fun stuff, fun stuff. Um,
We had someone quote your review, someone review us on our podcast about like your quote of, or maybe it was my quote, I can't even remember, of like autistic body, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. And someone wrote a 5-star review about us and it was like 0 out of 10 would not recommend. I feel like that would also sometimes sounds like socializing with Megan and Patrick is a 0 out of 10 would not recommend. But I don't.
Wait, that was a like a
No, no. I'm just saying, like, as we're talking about all these things that like we do, I'm like, is hanging out with us fun? I'm starting to wonder the question to that.
oh, interesting. I mean, if you set up the environment
Right. Just
well, but
right.
yeah, um, no, I mean, like, yeah, I think there's probably I don't know that I would, yeah, it could be hard parts about hanging out with us, um, for sure. That's funny. Um, so it's interesting that this is that waiting difficulty waiting turn is in the impulsivity. It also feels like that restlessness probably feeds into this.
Yeah.
My guess, so a part of the impulsivity is our brains often have like inhibition differences. So like there's an assessment that um that I do when I assess for ADHD, and I've done it on myself. And when I did it on myself, it was so fascinating. So it's um basically what it is you have a computer screen, And every time you see a certain letter, you're supposed to hit the space bar. It, and you're not supposed to hit it when it's a different letter. And I kept hitting it when it wasn't the number, and I was like, "Stop, stop, stop, like, why are you hitting it?" Like, and there's something about, like, between the time my brain, like, if we start a movement, but the time the brain takes to tell you to stop and do it, that inhibition is harder for ADHDers. So a lot of this also, it's not just about that hyperactivity, but that inhibition of, like, once we start, especially like if we start a motor movement, it's harder for us to hit the brakes on that. And so that inhibition piece is part of this impulsivity.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I struggle with that as well.
Yeah, my scores on that, my inhibition is like I don't have great inhibition, it turns out. Um, which also makes me super fun to hang out with.
I mean, this is also feeds into like prior gambling addiction history with impulsivity and inhibition struggles, and also feeds into misdiagnosis when you're a young adult in their mid 20s and you're struggling with impulsivity and inhibition and all these other things. It's like, oh, well, clearly this looks like bipolar 2. These look like hypomanic episodes going back and forth. And I would attribute a lot of the gambling piece to ADHD.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's, you know, we're kind of like pulling out funny stories, but there's a shadow side to this stuff for sure. I mean, I was just writing something up about this yesterday of um like this is part of what contributes to things like substance abuse and gambling and addiction and dangerous driving
Yep.
and unsafe sex practices that can, like, there's an increase of teenage pregnancy among ADHDers. That's not shocking. Um, there's I think this is an older study, but it found 40% of men in prison have ADHD. Like, there is a shadow side to this stuff that I know you and we've talked about it on other episodes, that, like, this is not easy, to live with.
No, not at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. If I could carve out the impulsivity part of my brain and, like, discard it, I think I maybe would.
I I would say yes, like 90% of the time, and then there's parts of the time entrepreneurial, ugh, um,
It
where I
works.
feel like impulsivity is quite useful in some instances where I'm like being more impulsive, moving towards that stimulation seeking behavior, and I'm also kind of more creative in those moments. So, but I do agree that 99% of the time I would like to get rid of that component.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we don't really get to know what our brains fully would be like if we
Right.
carved out parts of it. So we don't get to know, like, the flip side of the impulsivity that can lead to creativity and innovation. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, okay. And then this feels pretty similar to some of the other ones, but the last one is often interrupts or intrudes on others. So, like, butts into conversations, games, activities, using other people's things without asking or receiving permission. For adolescents and adults, might intrude into or take over what others are doing.
Mm. That's such a fascinating reframe, when you think about it that way. 'Cause I'm like, damn, I do that. I used to do that a lot where I would just like take over for someone and like, and I never attributed it to being bored or restless or whatever the case may be. It's just like, oh, this needs to get done. And I see the opening. I might as well start the process.
So that's kind of like taking control of a situation. Yeah. What about though the, like, if someone's having a conversation, like, the breaking into it, or is that also?
I mean, I can see instances of that. I don't feel like I do that as often, but again, circling back to what you said about us being probably people who just masked significantly more, being autistic as well, probably don't butt into the conversations as much because I'm constantly like reading the dynamics of the conversations, trying to figure out where to insert myself.
Yeah, yeah. I think I did more of that too. Like I'd always partly because I'm hearing everything in the room, um, like I'd get curious about people's conversation and kind of want to be a part of it, but and like sometimes I would try to break into it, but I think the shy, autistic, like awkward parts of me like wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
It's
So
interesting
I
though, 'cause, like,
yeah.
as I cut you off, when I'm traveling, and maybe this is related to my ADHD, but I am way more likely to butt into conversations with strangers. Like I'll be listening, I'll be absorbing everything in a room, and then I'll be like, "Oh, by the way," and then start talking to people at like airport lounges or random towns in the middle of nowhere at pubs and restaurants. So, and they were probably like, "What the hell is happening?" But that happens a lot.
That's so interesting. I wonder if there's something about I mean, I've heard autistic people talk about this. When you travel, there's not the expectation that you know all the social norms, so there can
Right.
be sometimes more comfort. I wonder if there's something about the comfort of you're already gonna be breaking social norms, but because you're from a different culture, not because you're autistic, that I wonder if that kinda makes it easier to kinda initiate those.
Yeah. I mean, I think I find myself way more interesting when I'm traveling. So maybe I just feel like there's just that ability to just do that as well and have free flowing conversation, which I cannot do in my day to day life. I don't know why.
It is traveling is such an interesting experience. I feel like a different human when I travel
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So 10 out of 10, hanging out with Patrick is fun when you're traveling, but like
Yeah.
0-star review at home.
I think that feels accurate. Yeah. My Ariel was telling me the other day, she's like, you have to stop telling people when they suggest new restaurants or places to go that those places suck because they're not going to want to invite you to places anymore. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Like, but I realized how often I do that where
Like
someone's
you'll
like,
just
oh,
be like, that place sucks.
yeah, they'll be like, hey, you want to go check out whatever coffee shop or restaurant or whatever? I'm like, no, that place is terrible. And they're like, oh, okay. Did you want to go to like the same three places we always go? And I'm be like, yeah, of course I do.
The other
So
thing, like they're making a social bid and you're reading it, very literally of like, do you want to go to this restaurant? And you're answering it very factually, like, no, that restaurant sucks.
yeah,
Um, but it sounds like you're kind of missing the social bit of like, do you want to hang out?
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So the non-autistic response would be, right, like, no, I don't wanna go there, but do you wanna go here?
Right.
But I love your very autistic response of like, "No, that place sucks."
Yeah, that place is terrible. Why would we go there? And it's like, oh, okay. Not going to recommend things anymore. Just ask you what you want to do. But then that's way too much pressure. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, can you give me some ideas? Oh, good.
We are hard to hang out with.
What a fun loop.
Yeah. Mm.
Uh, anyway, um, I think we just covered all the criteria.
Yeah, so that's all so those, 9 again are we did hyperactive last week and impulsivity, but they're clumped together. So if an adult has 5 of those, that's enough for a diagnosis, and then for children, 6. And then there's always, when it comes to diagnostic criteria, kind of the rule out considerations. So, like criteria B would be that these traits have to have been present before age 12. This one's a little bit tricky because if a child has been really well supported in their environment, like maybe they are in a primary school that whole time where there's not a lot of like different classes and maybe they're really well accommodated for at home, these these traits might not be super apparent yet. And then for females, our ADHD traits often become more exasperated after we go through puberty. So there's some criticism of this like 12, but I mean it is a neurodevelopmental. It's classified as a neurodevelopmental condition, so there has to be evidence that this was present in our early years,
Right.
which just that makes sense. And that is tricky because there's more and more adults seeking, diagnosis right now, but then sometimes we don't have great memories, especially if we're ADHD. Sometimes our memory of our childhood is really hard. Like we don't have many memories, so that is a little bit tricky. And then the next criteria is that they call them symptoms, but traits have to be present in more than one setting. So like both at school and at home, or both at work and at home. If it's just in one setting, the idea is maybe there's something in that setting versus like this is innate to the person. There's also been some criticism of that because that misses some people, especially people who mask their ADHD, but that is currently part of the diagnostic criteria. So there's different screeners we'll use, or there are different ways to like capture like, okay, what's work like, what is work like? What are your relationships like? Um, what's home like? Also your emotional well-being, like that can be a domain of functioning, kind of your emotional mental health.
Right.
And then there's got to be evidence that this interferes with or impacts quality of life, work, school. Again, we're not talking about like everyone has some restlessness, everyone has some distractibility. Like we're not talking about, oh yeah, I've got this or this trait. We're talking about something that really impacts how we experience moving through the world and impacts these spaces. Um, and then the other specifiers of like it's not attributed to things like psychotic disorder or mood disorder or anxiety, the rule outs. So those are the other parts of the criteria.
Thanks for summing that up, and great summarization per usual. I hope this series was helpful. We are definitely going to do an episode on ADHD techs. We're going to do an episode on interest-based nervous systems. We have so many ideas. Go figure. And that will change week by week and day by day. But I like these collections. I'm really starting to enjoy having these. I think they help structure. And they're just really enjoyable. And I'm glad we waited so late into the game to do this instead of starting with it. But thanks for listening to Divergent Conversations. New episodes are out on Fridays on all major platforms and YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share. And goodbye.